You've just turned on your podcatcher and selected the Tabletop Bellhop Gaming Podcast. And Sean's just wrapping up the intro. What do you do?
Well, let's see. I let the audience know that tonight we're going to be talking about board games with strong RPG elements. Games that provide more role-playing than your average dungeon crawler. And then we're going to be reviewing one such game with Adventure Party, the role-playing party game from Smirk and Dagger.
But before that, let's have some character name introductions. I'm playing your host, Sean, and with me, out from behind the scenes, we have Deanna.
Hello to all my fellow cardboard connoisseurs out there.
And the party bellhop.
I am Mo Tuzno. I'm playing the Tabletop Bellhop, who's a cardboard concierge with the goal of helping people make their game nights better.
We record this podcast Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern on twitch.tv/tabletopbellhop, and we love it when people take part and join us in our chat room. This episode exists thanks to our Patreon patrons and our sponsor, Grand Gamers Guild.
You can find detailed show notes for tonight's episode at tabletopbellhop.com/episode 264. That's 264. Links in our show notes may be affiliate links, which cost you nothing but help to support us.
The Tabletop Bellhop is here to answer your gaming and game night questions. Tonight's question comes from Victor Cintron over on MeWe. They write, "Maybe you can help. My daughter is loving D&D, and I'm looking for board games with heavy RPG elements. All I've tried are dungeon crawls with not much RPG elements."
Thanks for the great question, Victor. And it's so cool to see questions coming in from social media and not just our questions at tabletopbellhop.com email address.
Well, Victor, I think we can definitely help you out here. Just even reading the question, there's already games that came to mind right away. Though I do have to say your question's a bit broad. Like when I first read the question, what popped into my head was a certain style of game, certain games with improv elements where you're taking on characters and playing characters, but it's still a board game. But then I mentioned to Deanna, hey, you know what topic I want to do on Wednesday? And she thought of something completely different than what I did and was thinking about RPG elements in a different way. And then I realized, what's an RPG element anymore? Because there's JRPGs, there's computer role-playing games, there's TTRPGs, and what people expect from those three letters, RP and G, are completely different depending on what generation they're from, their gaming experience, what they're used to playing, where they're coming from. So I think what we're going to have to do is talk about the different things that I think would be considered RPGs or what we think are RPG elements, and then suggest games based on those, because I don't know if Victor is just looking for a game where you get to name your character, or if Victor's looking for a game where there's a full campaign, right? It could be any of that stuff.
You know, I didn't even think about video games or JRPGs. I immediately thought that they intended tabletop games when they were asking the question, because it was talking about board games.
Well, they also called out D&D. So I think they definitely mean that, but that could mean Baldur's Gate nowadays.
For me, part of the thing for me is RPG and board games are both different and similar. So if you want to role play during your game of Monopoly, go for it. No reason you can't. I'm thinking games like a game like Trouble. Even that, you can have some RPG, some role playing elements in there. Not RPG maybe, but role playing elements can fit into there. In many ways, if it's a game, it's the people at the table who are going to bring role-playing elements or not to that game. Right. And I find the more that the game forces that sort of thing, the less success you may or may not have, because some people just aren't as comfortable with that sort of thing. And it does therefore limit who is and isn't going to be playing a game when you start enforcing role-playing elements into a board game.
But like the type of role-playing elements you're talking about, Sean, that's more like taking on a role and playing in character.
Which is role-playing.
Which is role-playing, right? But I mean, it's that specific part of role-playing is what I think you're, in Monopoly, for example, I don't think you're ever going to level up. Right. You're not going to, but you could play a character who's buying property and renting, and you could play it out that way.
But see, you do level up in a dungeon crawl, but you don't need to RPG, but there doesn't need to be any role-playing in a dungeon crawl.
So
and
yeah,
that's sort of where I read the question. Again, we've all had 3 different takes here. When I saw that question, they said, I've done dungeon crawls. She loves D&D. She wants the RPG elements. And if you've done a dungeon crawl, well, that's all the mechanical elements of D&D. You're just missing the role-playing part of it.
True, but only with the best dungeon crawl board games, because there's dungeon crawl board games that are literally rolling moves and roll to hit, like Hero Quest, right? So that's where I needed more information. So I think Sean and I were actually on the same page when we first saw it, because the first thing I think of when I hear I want a board game with role-playing elements or RPG elements, I think role-playing. I think playing a character where you're more than just a figure on a board. There's improv involved. There's description. There's who your character is. They have a backstory that you are going to talk as that character or describe your actions in a first-person perspective of that character. Though I get some people do RPGs third person, but you're no longer just the piece on the board. You are making decisions. You're acting in characters. Your decisions in the game aren't going to be the optimum move to give you the most points. They're going to be what your character would do or what the game is telling you your character would do. That is where I first went. That's where my brain went when this happened. So the first games I started to think of were games where you made a character as part of the game and then had to play that character. And these would be the games, like Sean says, that actually forces you to role play, which some people aren't all that comfortable with.
The example that I would give, though, is Decorum. It gives you character descriptions, and it ends up becoming part of play, that you end up sort of playing those characters as laying out the furniture to Decorum. You are roommates, and you have to solve a logic puzzle to get all the pieces of furniture in the right place, basically. And they describe a little scenario for each one with characters, and we found as we were playing it, and I've found as I've been teaching it to other people, that people tend to play it in character. If they didn't give a name and a description of the person and their attitude, that wouldn't be happening. So the game does direct you towards role-playing elements that might not otherwise be there.
Yeah, that one's interesting because, again, when I played it, and I have only played it the once, so it may evolve over play, but the first time I played it, I could not have told you what, 5 minutes into the game, I couldn't have told you what the description and the scenario were. I was just solving the puzzle.
Yeah, and to me, Decorum's actually got a really nice place there because that is there if you want it. You have an ongoing, supposedly there's an ongoing story. We got like 6-7 games in Decorum, didn't see the story yet, but supposedly there's an evolving story that you learn as you play the game. And in each individual game, you are playing characters. You get not only a character description, but like something you're supposed to read off in character, and the game encourages it. But what I like about it is for those people who aren't into that, you can play the game 100% mechanically. It can just be a logic puzzle that you're working on together. Now, you have to follow the limited communication rules with the game breaks, but that's not role-playing. That's following the games of the word play in the game. And I think Decorum is actually a great example of a board game that has optional RPG elements.
I think it's because we played 3-player with Sean, and if I remember correctly, the 3-player scenario was, there's no rules. There was no.
Yeah, the characters are only in the 2-player campaign. The 3- and 4-player rules do not include taking on roles at all.
There we
go. Which is why Sean probably, I forgot Sean played 3-player.
That's exactly why.
That'd be why you don't remember. Because I'll tell you, the first story in Decorum is 2 male best friends moving in together who are probably romantically involved. That's hinted at, but not given away. And there's a particular object in it that is very important to one character. And you learn it right away because the person mentions, the one character talks about his dead mother's heirloom. And then the other person talks about how much they hate horror. So you get this setup of the mother's ghost and horror and trying to figure out what that object is. And like, I clearly remember the story from the first one. Now, other games like this, where you literally have to take a character, you're making a character, you are playing, you're role playing it. They are role playing games with board game elements, or role playing games or board games with role playing elements. The strongest, which I have a hard time calling it a board game, because to me, it's just a role playing game, is For the Queen. Or the latest version is Oh Captain, My Captain, which we have on the shelf of shame. I really want to play. Now that is on Board Game Geek. It's in the board game stats. Like, it seems to have ended up in the board game realm of things somehow. So I'm considering it a board game, but to me, that is a pure prompt-based improv role-playing experience where you have no game master and you learn the rules the first time you sit down to play, and you make up a character as you're playing.
It's a card-driven RPG. I don't even see that one as a board game.
So that one's, I don't, but it's on Board Game Geek. It ends up on top 100 board game lists. It seems to have been classified by the industry or the media as a board game. So we're going to throw that in there. Now, another game like that is Kiss the Goblin, where you're answering cards in character. But the thing with that is you're not making one character. So yes, you are role playing. You have to answer the question card as the alignment you've been randomly assigned. So there's definite role playing. But then it doesn't have any of the other RPG elements. It doesn't even have a set fantasy setting. So there's no setting. There's no evolving story. There's no campaign. You don't play the same character because the next time you get a card, you're a totally different alignment and a totally different character. Like, to me, that just has role playing as an RPG element and none of the other game parts of role playing.
So, and this
you take on a role for 1 minute and then you're done with it.
See, yeah, this is interesting because you and I and Dee, I think, consider this role playing and consider these role playing games. A large portion of the population doesn't. Right. So this is something I have sort of figured out is a creative game. You aren't taking on a role. You're just making up a story quickly about whatever the card is in front of you. And this goes for Dubious. It goes for Kiss the Goblin and a lot of games like that. We are role players, so we see it from that lens. But a lot of gamers just think of it as a creative game, much like, but wait, there's more. Again, you're not. Right. You can be making up. You can be a salesman character in role playing, but you're not really. You're just making up an idea, and that works for Dubious and Kiss the Goblin as well. If you look at it from that point of view, from that different non-role player, point of view.
When you compare it to, but wait, there's more, I see it. But the framing of the games is RPG style framing. Kiss the Goblin, you're given an RPG style alignment to play as your role. Like it has.
Again, you're saying play as your role, but it's really, it's just make up something based on this card you're given. Mm-hmm. And again, we are steeped in role playing. We have been doing it for all of our lives, and we are going to likely see things from that point of view. And yes, it is fantasy, and it is based off of concepts taken from a role-playing game, unquestionably. But the actual skills involved are just making up something real quickly based on a card in front of you. And you can take that to a point where you are playing the role, but you don't need to.
See, I think Dubious is a step the other way. As Dubious goes too far, because Dubious, you sit down and make a character. That is what you're instructed to do. You have a character sheet, you're picking a role, and you're writing down background information. And then you're answering multiple questions about that character, and the character evolves, and you tell an ongoing story as you go through the cards. To me, that's pushing it really close to the role-playing side. Where I totally agree, Kiss the Goblin's just an improv game where it's based on RPG alignments. But to me, that's still an RPG element either way, whether people call it that or not. It's just like people trying to decide that they're not role-playing games, they're story games, right? I'm disappointed that our resident story gamer, Jeff, isn't in the chat to kind of argue that side of things as well. It's just definitions. I would say those are all RPG elements, and those are games where you're playing roles. And I think they're all great suggestions, potentially, for Victor. Now, again, Dubious is the one to me that feels the most like you're playing that character for the night. It's not a quick game. You're playing for 1 to 2 hours. It's not a 15-minute. And you are evolving that character. You're answering questions as the character. And we've even said Dubious needs a, but wait, there's more element where you can say, but wait, tell me more about this. Now, other games in that category, most recently, we discovered Adventure Party, the role-playing party game. So this one even claims to be a role-playing game, and I think it is in that way. And it's similar to Dubious, where you are going to create a character, and you are going to go on an adventure with the rest of the party, but you are purely improvising things. But in this one, you have skills, you have stats, you have all the stuff you'd expect from a D&D game, without any of the mechanics, because the whole game is a storytelling game. It's all improv. That's one of my strongest recommendations, actually, when I saw this question, was Adventure Party, which we're actually going to review later on this episode. Now, a different, lighter version of that, with the latest edition of Dungeons and Dragons, Hasbro put out this box called Dungeons and Dragons Adventure Begins. I'm not going to get into all the detail here, but it's not what you think it's going to be, and I don't think it's what they marketed it as, which is an introduction to 5th edition D&D. It is very much not that. It is another total improv game, very, very loosely based on the D&D system. The only similarity is you're rolling a D20 and you want to roll high. But it's set in the D&D world where you have D&D maps and creatures and mimics and owl bears and, there's the Forgotten Realms. But it's a pure RPG improv experience where players take turns as DM and everything else. So that is another one I would recommend. Though I've got to say for Victor, if you're already playing D&D, I don't think Adventure Begins is going to be all that interesting to you.
Adventure Party is the first thing that popped into my head. I mean, we've been playing it recently, so there's that too. But it's an improv game, but at least you roll a D20. I mean,
now ones I wasn't sure on that definitely fall into, well, even people sometimes claim these aren't board games, are some of the hidden role games. And like murder mystery style games. So so hidden role games first. In Battlestar Galactica, if you're a Cylon, you have to play that role. You play the game differently than if you're a loyalist. Plus, it features characters from the show that some people will want to role play, at least inspired by the characters. Now, fair warning, in that particular game, that's how the game can break, is if people decide to play too close to the original characters. Another example is Shadows over Camelot. The player, if you are the trader in Shadows over Camelot, you're going to play the game very differently, which involves playing a different role from everyone else on the table, where you're going to play cards differently and make different suggestions and talk about things differently. Now, I'll admit, when my friends play Shadows over Camelot, we get into it and full-on role play and call each other Sir and Sir Galahad, we need your help in the 13th hour. Can you help us upon the hill, right? Like, we get totally into character. And then if you're looking at like Werewolf or Mafia, the person who gets the Seer card is going to act and talk and do things very differently than the player who gets a Werewolf card.
Bluffing is not role-playing. That's my argument here. Like, you're going to bluff. You said you're going to play cards differently and act differently because you're the trader. Well, that's just bluffing.
No, isn't that just playing the role of trader?
See, and again, this is where I think you absolutely can role play in a hidden role game, whether it's Werewolf or Cylon, Shadows over Camelot or Battlestar Galactica. There's absolutely role playing that can be done there. But the game itself is a purely mechanical game that requires no role playing.
And then having had bad experiences with people role playing and it breaking the game, it makes me lean towards this is not a role playing game, guys.
I've seen so many people role play while playing those, though. Like, Sean's argument is you can role play in any game. I don't see many people role playing as the race car or actually, no, I do always see people role play as the race car in Monopoly because they go vroom vroom. But I don't see a lot of people playing as, say, the thimble. But anytime we played any of those hidden trader games that are fairly involved, even what's the one we were playing? Stuff of Legend. But then I don't think anyone was playing a bear. Right? They were just playing their role of either traitor or loyal.
No, go ahead, Sean. Go ahead.
I was going to move on to mystery games. If you've got something else to say here, bring it in.
One of the things that stands out for me is at Origins last year, I went and saw the Celebrity One Night Werewolf, or Ultimate One Night Werewolf, Ultimate One. I don't know how many different words there are in there, but that game played, and these were all like actors and performers. It was a pretty mechanical game. It really wasn't there really wasn't much going on. Any of the actual play that was going on were the interactions between the people who knew each other and had played games together and knew and were having fun on the stage. There wasn't any role playing there. And again, that is my only actual werewolf experience. But again, these are the people who you would have expected to role play One Night Werewolf, and nope, didn't happen.
All right, so the end result, I think, for hidden role games for Victor are probably not. Like, you might want to check them out. They might be interesting. You can role play them in them, and role playing in them might be easier than other mechanical board games, but really probably not enough RPG elements to keep you interested.
So then the next thing you had mentioned was mystery games or murder mystery games. So I was thinking of Ghost in the Machine, which includes Which Way book-like elements. Mm-hmm. So it's very immersive and thematic, and you are set in a role where you are playing the detective, not just a generic detective either, like someone with a name and a background that you are now playing as. The thing is, I would say 98.2% of your decisions in that game are based on making a smart choice trying to solve a puzzle, not a thematic choice based on what this person would do. So while I found it very immersive and fun, I don't think it was a role-playing experience.
See, there was a scene early on where I remember you could like choose to cross a picket line or not. That felt like a character decision moment, but I didn't stick around for the full game, and I don't know how often things like that came up.
Right.
Now, I think when you're talking about Which Way books, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the one we reviewed recently, a preview. Sorry, we didn't actually review. We previewed the dungeon adventure, whose name is escaping me right now, Mo.
Fighting Fantasy Adventures.
Yes, Fighting Fantasy Adventures. And for me, that one lent itself to role-playing. While, again, I don't think there's any need to it. The game, the way it was laid out, the choices offered to you on cards, the way certain people got cards and could choose to act or not act on those cards.
Yeah, there was some
plus given the you are a character, you are the rogue, you are the barbarian or what have you. That game, even as a dungeon crawl, lent itself to people becoming their character. And I did. I played the sneaky rogue. I forget what I did with a potion, but there was something or other I did that basically screwed over other people.
I think the games that have the Which Way elements like that, where you might not make the one optimal, this is going to let me win choice, but rather make the interesting choice or the character-driven choice.
No, I agree. And again, it's going to be very dependent on the game. To stick with talking about Fighting Fantasy Adventures, Victor mentioned dungeon crawls. And I'm like, man, it so depends on the dungeon crawl. So the ones that came to my mind when you're looking at ongoing choices affecting the outcome, right? So you have your ongoing story and you have your multiple choice, you have multiple paths. If you win the mission, you go one way. If you fail the mission, you go another way. To me, that is an RPG element that has been added to some board games. And to me, it gives you more of being in a living world and having decisions that matter and possibly making those decisions as a specific character or in character. So to me, those do fit what Victor's looking for. But in dungeon crawls in particular, it makes me think of Hero Quest, which is literally a roll and move game. Even though everyone loves it, they grew up with it, it's fantastic, whatever. You literally roll to move your people. When you get up to a door, the dungeon tells you where to put the monsters. Then you roll dice to see who wins the combat. Like there are decisions made, yes, and there are some strategies better than others. And you're at least playing against a human, like you're not following an AI. But also, when you finish the mission, nothing much changes. And it's to me, that does not have many RPG elements except for the trappings. It's in a dungeon and it has orcs and goblins and you're playing fighters and warriors. That said, people, again, can role play. Whereas Gloomhaven, there's choices to be made, but not in each individual mission. And to me, what makes that more of a role-playing experience is the discussion when you're with your group going, do we go over here to the forest or do we want to go back to the Inox? And then the cards you get every time you go back to town that always present a difficult choice. And I think that's where some dungeon crawlers are going to stick out more, is that branching path, multiple choice. You can go explore in Gloomhaven. You can decide to go do a side quest. There's no linear plot to follow, as opposed to I can play scenario 1, then scenario 12 of Hero Quest, and that doesn't break anything.
I think exploration for me is part of the RPG experience. And I was thinking of a legacy game like, say, Seafall, which I know, not one of your favorites. But you explore and you make choices in the Which Way style book in there. You have a character, you name your character, and you level up. Things carry on from one mission to the next. It has, to me, RPG elements for a board game.
I think a lot of it for me, now as we're sort of working through this and talking through different things, one of the big things that stands out for me as a requirement, even more so than the progression, the leveling up sort of idea, is really the fact that you have choices to make where there isn't an optimal choice. Because in a board game, in most board games, there is a best thing to do. You want to win the game. You want to progress to in a direction that is going to cause you to win the game. And in a role-playing game, you are not trying to win. You are trying to do something. And part of that is having a selection of options before you. Some may be better or worse, but none is optimal. And having those choices is really a standout sort of concept for role-playing games for me.
Or another level of that to me would be that you can take the non-optimal option, knowing full well that it's not the optimal option. I think also adds a big level of RPG element, especially for people who are used to fail forward style role-playing games. Anyone who's played Powered by the Apocalypse knows the fun of taking the tough road, the bad option, just to see how things turn out.
I think how story-driven the game is, like Chronicles of Crime. You're trying to solve a mystery, right? But I know that I felt compelled to make some less optimal choices just to discover out of curiosity of what would happen when I did it, who I would get to talk to, what would happen next, right?
It's funny because I think like the Scooby-Doo Escape from Haunted Mansion, where you can make choices like, Scooby eats whoever eats the butler, those are things you can try in the game. You can do things like that. Now, those aren't necessarily dead end choices. It's not a path. You can do things and recover in that particular game because it's aimed more for kids. But that sort of concept where you can just, hey, there's a thing. I bet you I'm going to do it. And you're not limited because the game is like, no, you must follow this path and these paths, and one will win, one will not.
So speaking of which way style games, we already mentioned Final Fantasy Adventures. I haven't played them, so I don't know how good they are, but there are the Choose Your Own Adventure. They took 2 of those old classic books and made them into board games. There's Legacy of Dragonhold from Final Fantasy Games, which you make a character, you have a character sheet, and you're going to use the abilities on it, but it's very much just a which way book. So that's a take it or leave it. Deanna already called out Ghost in the Machine. I'm not too RPG like though. I don't think it's a great recommendation, but if you want an immersive mystery game, man, like talk about immersive. There's some fantastic stuff there. One I want to call out is, here's an interesting one because it's only one part of the game. So the game Above and Below from Red Raven Games is a Euro build your city, collect your people, collect resource management game. But one of the options in the game is to send your people down into the depths and basically go explore a dungeon, which is done with a massive, like, which way style book where you go to, page 28, this, and you get options. And the best way to play the game is to have someone else read them off to you, and you don't know the outcome. And the more I played the game, the more that I was reminded of, Slay the Spire when you get to a question mark. It's like that aspect of Slay the Spire suddenly in Above and Below. But it's only that part of the game. Like the rest of the game, you're building a city and you're trading resources. But the depths, similar to going delving in Caverna with your dwarves, but that's more of a random table. Sean called out Scooby-Doo Escape from the Haunted Mansion. And I think one of the biggest which way books of all time, which is also going to get to once we talk a little more about exploration, is Tales of the Arabian Nights, with the thickest which way book I've ever seen. Now, another thing we brought up a couple times here that some people think is an important part of RPGs. Like if I say RPG to you, they think XP, leveling up, my character getting better gear, getting new abilities, and then playing that same character more than once. So I'm going to play the game next time, I get to play that same character, and I'm going to keep playing that character. Every time we sit down to play the game, I play that same character. They have a new story, they learn new things, and they get better. And there are quite a few board games that do this, and I admit this is an element I want in my RPG style games, because when it's not there, I don't like them. The example being Cthulhu Death May Die and Zombicide did not work for me because I wanted that progression. I wanted that ongoing story. I wanted to play the same character over and over and see them evolve. Now, is that role playing? Is that what you mean by an RPG element? Do you want like more little dials on your D&D character and ways to level up? I think it's important to some people, so I wanted to include it in the discussion tonight.
It's not just the progression and the leveling up, it's the character classes. If I say I'm playing a bard, you know what that means. There's, if I'm a scoundrel in Star Wars, there's things there that implies, and it comes with preconceived notions, right? And it gives you a framework that you're all in the same framework to discuss.
Yeah, it's interesting because partially because a lot of my RPG XP comes from superheroes. And while people keep demanding to put level progression into superheroes, I generally hate it. Especially if you're playing, canon superheroes. Spider-Man doesn't, in certain times Spider-Man has an arc, but a lot of times, Wolverine doesn't have much of an arc. He's been around for ages and he does the same thing. There is personal growth without character mechanical growth in a lot of superhero. And so for that, I don't feel that the desperate need for progression and leveling up that I know Mo really desires in his RPG games. Another interesting one that I didn't see on the list was Horizon Zero Dawn, board game that has character development. It has character leveling. You could RPG, but you don't have to.
Yeah, that one's we role played when we played. Definitely.
Yeah, we did.
Yep.
My character was the coward who rolled away and got the monsters to chase him and let you guys do all the hard work, and then I go in and steal the killing blows.
You wanted the monsters to chase you. They usually chased us and killed us instead, but
yeah.
That added to our enjoyment of the game, but was it built into the game, or is it just something that naturally happened with us at the table? I'm not sure where the line is there.
I will say it does have the progression. There is some choices, like going back to the choose your own. You need optional choices. Remember, whoever's the leader of the group gets to pick which mission to go on next. It's not a lot. There is progression even if you fail. You can fail forward in that game. So yeah, actually, Horizon Zero Dawn's a good example. One of my favorites, and I know I bring it up all the time because it's my favorite dungeon crawler, and everyone always looks at me weird because they don't think of Star Wars and dungeons. But Star Wars Imperial Assault is very much a dungeon crawler that has all that stuff. It has you get your character and you level up, and like you can play the Jedi and you can discover your lightsaber. And the cool thing is you don't every time. You might discover your lightsaber because of the way they seed the deck. And like if you run into Han Solo because of a random card, you can then use him as an ally 3 missions later, and you get the whole making your character better. But though in that particular game, it's more about the equipment you add to your character. And if I remember, there's a big stage where you can like flip your card over and you're better. But it's got all that ongoing story and the which way, and you get to choose which way to go. And then depending, it's a one versus many game without the app. Like depending on if you win, you get to pick where to go next. Whereas if you lose, the Empire gets to pick which happens next, or they can play a card on it. I love that game for the RPG elements in it.
No, that game was very much to me an RPG style board game. And maybe it's because it was our role-playing group that segued into playing it, but we were definitely role-playing while we were playing that game. The leveling up aspects, the story missions, the which way aspects to the missions sometimes, well, mostly depending on whether you succeeded or failed, but I think there were some choices there. It's been a while since we played it. Yeah, no, it very much felt like an RPG experience to me. And again, because it's cooperative, you're a team, a party playing against the DM, right? Like it has that feel to it as well.
Now, on the other hand, there's the opposite where you do have character development, but in Sanctum, it's kind of pointless character development. And while we have called this the Diablo board game, there is more role playing in a couple of people hanging out and chatting on team chat while you play Diablo than there is in any game of Sanctum. As much as it does evoke the Diablo feels once in a while, it's not a role-playing game at all.
Yeah, I can't recommend Sanctum to someone. Hey, you want a game with RPG feels? Sorry. One of the games we haven't talked about in a long time, so it's nice to bring it up again, that I think fits a lot of these, is Adventuria, the adventure card game, which makes sense because it's based on Das Schwarze Auge, the very famous German role-playing game. It's got character advancement, though minor, very little after every game, but there's a little bit. There's no set ongoing story, but you can play the same character through multiple different stories. There is a suggested progression for the existing scenarios that you can go through. You can tweak your deck after every game, so there's a bit of that in there. But the mechanics in it feel like a role-playing game, which might even be another point here, is what board games feel like a role-playing game. Because in Aventuria, unlike most card games and deck builders, you got to roll to hit, and then you roll damage on damage dice. And that just to me feels like a role-playing game, that I am rolling to hit my melee attack, and I have my melee. And then you want to swing off the chandelier, you've got to make a skill check, right? Once you start throwing in skill checks and all that with the character optimization, like Aventuria is pretty close to playing a role-playing game, except it breaks down on the fact that the stories are linear. Like you get to the boss fight and your goal is to defeat this guy, and you're going to have to swing across the chandelier at least twice to get points over here. And you have the option to do this cutlery thing to give you bonus points here. So it's very scripted. But other than that, that one really gave me a role-playing game feel. Like, to me, it felt as good as sitting down to play a game of Warhammer. Like, I sat down and played a game of Aventuria, I get that same dopamine hit I get from playing a full RPG.
I completely agree. I will say that it's a scenario-driven game, and I felt that, and I'm not going to be able to remember which ones, but I felt some scenarios felt more RPG-like than others.
Yes. Agreed.
And it gave you a little more freedom and a less like I'm just here to roll some, But definitely, 300%, that is a card game RPG.
Now, similar to it, I am going to call it out, the Pathfinder adventure card game. I don't think it's as good. Sorry, Pathfinder fans. You don't get quite as much customization, and the playing through a random deck of cards that's only slightly different based on your adventure, with the only real adventure difference being the story you're told before you start playing, just didn't quite do it for me. But before I played Aventuria, I would have strongly recommended the Pathfinder adventure card game. I'm going to bring up an interesting one, because one big aspect of playing role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and other trad games is making your character. And I've got to say, a board game you may enjoy that has one aspect of role-playing games is Role Player, spelled ROLL, because it's making a D&D style character. That is the goal of the game. But it takes that and makes it a Euro game, all about dice mitigation and optimization and building the best character to get the most points. So it makes making a character about as dry as you possibly can. But that might appeal to you because you're trying to do things like match the perfect alignment and collect sets of gear that give you the most points. So I'm going to call that one out as an interesting one, though really it's just one small aspect of RPGs. And no, there's no character progression. No, there's no playing your character, though to be fair, there are expansions now that let you then take the game further, including a full legacy game where you get to play your character you played in Role Player, but we have not explored any of that.
See, what we need is Traveler, the character creation board game.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a Traveler game. We saw at Origins. It actually looked really cool.
Yeah, but without the character creation,
I don't know what happened.
Traveler has no purpose to me. I literally have nothing to say about Traveler.
Is its own game in Traveler. You just do that and you're done.
Another aspect, Deanna brought it up a bit, was, and she mentioned Chronicles of Crime being an example of it, as well as the murder mystery game Wandering on London is another part that makes a game feel role-playing like. And this also very much gets to your open world RPG video game feel, is exploration and a world where you can do what you want. Now, I can't think of a lot of examples of these myself. The one I love the most is, of course, Zaya, Legends of a Drift System, which is a sci-fi game where you are given a ship. And I would say your ship is your character. And then that's it. There you go. The map's randomly generated. You can be a smuggler. You can be a pirate. You can just explore. You can try to find all the jump gates. You can just do missions. There's tons of different options on what you can do. From what I understand, Western Legends is the same thing, but in the Old West. I'm going to call out an older game that I own called Spurs that very much to me felt like a Western sandbox, where you could be an outlaw, you could rob banks, you could go, you could be a prospector and just harvest, you could be a cattle rancher, and it was kind of up to you what you wanted to do. And the fun came out of players playing different roles. So, one person's being the outlaw while someone else becomes the bounty hunter. Mage Knight is another example of one that is a fantasy sandbox, procedurally generated, map grows as you play, once you learn the full rules. Considered one of the best single player games out there of all time. And then, as Deanna mentioned, some of the murder mystery games. I would even call out like the original Talisman for having that feel. I am just wandering around the board to see what happens and then reacting to what happens to decide what to do next.
Is this where you'd lump in Tales from the Arabian Nights?
Well, Tales from the Arabian Nights would also go here. Yes, because you have a big map and you can basically go anywhere. And everywhere you go, you're like, you found a beggar and you get 6 choices to how to react to them. And then you look up that beggar on another chart with how your reaction is and then roll their temperament to find out what happens. And then you read a whole thing about how the beggar is actually, a golden snake hidden in disguise who wants you to go get a thing over on the other side of the map. So definitely.
Oh, that's wild. I haven't actually played that one. I've been wanting to.
But we should. We really, really should. Tales of the Arabian Nights, if you want a very interesting, but again, doesn't have the other aspect. There's no progression. There's no actual story. Like the story is just a bunch of stuff happened to me, which is kind of what Tales of the Arabian Nights is, right? Mm-hmm. I had a bunch of interesting encounters. That's kind of the whole thing. But there's no stats.
String of random events.
Yeah, there's no stats. There's no progression. There's no ongoing story. There is a set world you're exploring.
There's open world is a touchy one because there's a lot of games that are considered open world. Roads and Boats, Firefly, the game. There's a lot of games out there that are considered open, but calling them RPGs are tight. I mean, Isaiah, I agree. I think Isaiah really is. You really are playing that character of the ship, or the, if you want to make up the pilot of the ship, that is a character. But you can also go into other ways, into other forms of open world games that are a lot more mechanical. So, just
Firefly is an interesting one because Deanna actually asked me. She's like, "Do you want to bring it up for the backdrop?" And the only reason it's not back there is because there wasn't enough room. Because I think it fits. But Firefly is one of those. Again, it depends on your definition of a role playing game. When you're talking about D&D, you're playing a character. There are role playing games out there where you play teams and groups. In Firefly, you're playing the captain of your ship and you are building a crew, and that is part of the game. And then you can do whatever the heck you want. You can try to run contraband. You can just pick up and deliver. You can go hunt reavers. You can work with I forget what they're called, the police, the non-brown coats, the other side of the war, and be them and go after people. Except that game then throws in a mission and a way to get points. And to me, that's what ruins the game. Like, I played the game last time. Everyone else was just playing Firefly the RPG. They were flying around doing things, whereas I was laser focused on what that mission told me to do and got it done as quick as I could. And everyone else had a bad time because I ruined the game by winning, like by playing it.
Because you made the game end and we weren't done exploring. That's what the complaint was. They're like, wait, that's it? We're done? You won?
I'm like, yeah, because it was like the starter mission. It was like, go somewhere and get a bounty, then go somewhere else, then have so many credits when you go to this planet. And I'm like, all right, I raised the money, I got the bounty, I got the credits. Let's go here. Meanwhile, everyone else is on different parts of the map and everything else. So I think that does have that RPG element. But again, there's no progression. There's no, every game's separate. But I think Firefly is actually a good recommendation if you want a sci-fi, you own a ship, do what you want, but very much in the Firefly universe. Like it's not Zaya.
The other option, if you are looking
that the Serenity did.
If you are looking for exploring in a canon universe, there is Star Wars Outer Rim.
That one I haven't played to know. From what I understand, that one's pretty mechanical, but I have not played that game.
It's mechanical, but again, it's exploring. It's open world. You're playing either a bounty hunter or a mercenary or a smuggler and exploring the world around you in the Star Wars world.
Fair. All right. Do we have anything else that we wanted to hit on for like RPG elements that we think could be showcased in board games or board games that have RPG elements we haven't mentioned? Because I got to say, all these kind of mash together in every game. Like you could probably take the different things we talked about, right? So like level progress, some type of progression, ongoing story, multiple choices, playing a character, and put them like rate these games 1 to 10 in each of those, which would actually probably be a pretty fascinating thought experiment. But like all the games we mentioned have some aspects. Is there an aspect of role playing that we may have missed? Those are the ones I had thought of.
Loot, treasure.
Well, treasure? Sanctum. We called Sanctum. So
yeah, there is your game. If all you want to do is collect items. You want Sanctum from Czech Games Edition.
No,
Because that is what that game's all about. Rolling lots of dice, we can give you that too. I know this fantastic game about gladiators battling in an arena that uses D6 dice. All right, so the biggest thing I keep wondering about all of this, and I have to ask, and I'm asking Victor here, I guess, but like, why? Like you're enjoying D&D, play D&D. And if you really like the RPG elements of D&D, explore other role-playing games. Like, there are tens of thousands of role-playing games out there. I don't know what there's more of in the world, board games or role-playing games, but it's pretty close. I don't know how many new RPGs come out every year, but just look on any of the crowdfunding platforms in the RPG categories, and you're going to find everything. I own role-playing games about pretty much every topic, from courtroom dramas that you play out through interpretive dance to XXX Street Luge. Like, there are games for everyone out there. They're as diverse as board games. And I'm just a little confused by, why do you need the RPG elements in board games? Like, if you enjoy RPGs, play RPGs. Like, yes, if you're looking for an overlap, that's fine. Now, if it's just like, D&D's work, I need to, the DM has to prepare maps, and you have to buy books, and you need adventures, and you need to do all that. There are all kinds of role-playing games out there that get rid of that problem. We mentioned a couple tonight that kind of lumped in with board games with For the Queen. There is no setup. You buy the deck of cards, and the first time you play, you can cut the shrink at a table with your friends and play right then. That's it. That you just get going. There's games like Fiasco. There are so many out there. So my first question to anyone who's like, I want a board game with more RPG elements, is just go play an RPG. Like, there's nothing, RPGs aren't that scary or intimidating. They're just a different form of gaming at the table with your friends.
Yeah, I disagree. I enjoy playing RPGs. I enjoy playing board games. They scratch two different itches. I can see an intersection there where you might want a board game that has more RPG elements. That you have found that to be fun, that there are games that have some RPG elements. You're looking for more of that in your board games. I think that's a legit question. I don't think it necessarily the answer is, nah, just go play an RPG.
I do sort of, again, and this is because we don't have all the information from Victor. Yes. I do think not knowing what itch is trying to be scratched here has left us a little bit floundering in the woods a little bit, because, yes, they've tried dungeon crawlers, but they want something with more of an RPG. My gut tells me go down the Gloomhaven path, start with Jaws of the Lion, as you always should. Everyone's starting Gloomhaven, start Jaws of the Lion, develop your Inox or what have you, and role play your choices and your dungeon exploration, and talk with your party members between delves, and enjoy that, but with the pre-built world, so you don't have to worry about, prepping your adventure.
Or jump to something like Adventure Party. If what you want is to be flamboyant and play in character and talk in a silly voice and do suboptimal things because that's what your character would do, you don't want to do that in Gloomhaven. I will admit, Gloomhaven's a very harsh game that's very difficult, and not playing optimally is not fun in that game. You might want to go with something like Adventure Party, where you just have silly fun improv, make it all up. You don't have to worry about stats and numbers, and, well, you do have to worry about numbers in that particular game because that's kind of the whole game. But you're not worrying about your strength. You're not leveling up. There's no prep required. You might want to go that way.
If someone I'm playing Gloomhaven with starts making silly fun choices, I may want to kill them in real life.
Yes,
That's not a good move.
Or depending on the age, Hero Quest could be a completely valid choice.
Now, there are a couple games I want to recommend that we haven't played. I know we already called out a couple of those, actually, but a couple that other people suggested to us. And our friends Tori and Kat, K-Tor, we haven't brought them up in a while because, they had a baby. Well, there's another one on the way. So congratulations, Tori and Kat, on Little Dragon number 2. So I don't know if we're ever going to game with them again, because I don't know if Dragon number 3 is coming after that. But it seems like they've become a production company right now, and they're just producing new domains for the world. So... but what they strongly recommend we play, and I've even got a copy, is Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle-earth. As the everything good I say about Star Wars Imperial Assault was improved in this, and it's set in Middle Earth. Now, I will admit, Tori and Kat are the biggest MERP fans. I Middle Earth in general, sorry, not the role-playing game. They love MERP, though. Middle Earth fans I know with tattoos and rings, and they did the Walk to Mordor challenge so they could get those things. You've seen the ads, I'm sure, on your social media feeds. They went and did that. They are the biggest fans. So take this with a grain of salt, but it is an ongoing story. You play the same characters over and over, and your choices make a difference. Which way you go matters. You level up, your characters get better. Though, again, it's a mechanical game. Like, as for coming up with a voice and getting into character and arguing with the other players in character and, telling stories around the campfire between adventures, that's going to be all on the players. That's not something included in the game.
I will say this made me think about something that I think what I might appreciate from a game like that is you can get into it as little or as heavy as you want in the role-playing aspects, and you can just lean into the mechanics if you want. And for someone like me I'm shy, I don't enjoy playing with strangers, that can be comforting.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other one I'm going to call out is Avalon Hill's Betrayal Legacy. So, as usual, when we do these topics, I always spend some time on the Googles trying to see what other people have recommended. And on every single person's list was Betrayal at House on the Hill. And I get it. I understand, because I find in that game, when you start off, yes, you pick a character and you have a miniature that looks unique. And I don't remember if there's a little backstory for each of the characters, but you do play an individual character. But once the haunt comes out, I've seen people really get into character, especially depending on what that haunt is. And that's, again, a hidden trader things. And I've seen people at that point role play, but I find that game so fragile because people don't expect that role playing. And if people get the haunt wrong and don't read the rules properly or skip a little rule, it can fall apart. So I don't usually recommend that game, but I have now seen a group play through Betrayal Legacy, and I have heard many people tell me that Betrayal Legacy doesn't have this problem. Plus, it has the added bonus of an ongoing story. You are telling a story, and depending on how you do in every segment of that story affects the next segment and which way things go. And you do play the same character start to finish. And the story is supposed to be very epic. I don't know if there's progression, but from what I understand, there is at least, like, you have more options as the game goes on. So there is progression that way. Honestly, if we didn't have a pile of legacy games to play through, various legacy or campaign games, I would have this on my wish list to play through with us.
For ones that we don't own and haven't played, one I'm curious about is it's that Cthulhu setting card game. What the heck is that called?
Arkham Horror, the card game?
Arkham Horror, the card game. I wonder how RPG like that is, because you play through scenarios. There's even like part 2 to scenarios where you go revisit it, and you play investigators and all of that. I haven't tried it, but I suspect that it might be Aventuria like in that.
That is potential. I always pictured it as more like Marvel Champions.
Marvel Champions made my short list today when I was thinking about this earlier, though. I'm like, I tend to make decisions like because I'm Spidey, and that's what Spidey would do to an extent in that game, because the theming is tight, so it drives your play in at least a small fashion.
Yeah, that one's the character you are playing drives how you play that character. But to me, that didn't feel very RPG-like at all.
Yeah, and you know what? I said it made my short list. It did. Yeah. I didn't pull it upstairs, but I did stop and look at it on the shelf for a minute, and I was like, maybe.
One we didn't call out, but I think probably should fit, Mice and Mystics.
Okay, so Mice and Mystics, you know what? I meant to call out Stuffed Fables, and it just, we're improvising, right? We're not necessarily going in the order of the notes and the point forms. Both of those, I think, are good. Mice and Mystics, you're playing a character, but it is very much a dungeon crawler. You are going through a story, but the story is 100% linear. And if you fail a mission, you just restart and have to try again. So yes, it has that. You're playing characters. The only progression is you unlock like new weapons and skills, new equipment, but it's minor. Like you might get one North sword, one other thing, and then you might unlock the catapult for a later mission, but you only actually unlock it because the next mission needs the catapult. So Mice and Mystics is iffy, but I would say Stuffed Fables fits even more so. Besides having a very cool theme of being Stuffy's protecting a girl, her first night in the big girl bed, and then ending up having to battle the toys under her bed and ending up in a parallel universe, that has branching paths. You have choices. You can go this way or you can go that way. and there's a system for when you fail, something can happen. So I think Mice and Mystics works. It's RPG-like, but it's no more RPG-like than your average dungeon crawler. It's got a great story, definitely worth reading and playing through for that, and it's got some neat mechanics. Whereas Stuffed Fables has more RPG elements, but still there's more of a dungeon crawl game than role-playing. And I find another thing with those games is it's hard to get in character when you don't know the character, right? So especially that game, because it's not based on anything, but I had that problem with Stuff of Legend, right? Like here I'm playing whatever ballerina top. I haven't read the comics, so I have no tie to that character, and I don't know how they should act different. Whereas Mice and Mystics felt like that too, where like I'm whatever, I don't remember the names, but I'm like Dolly the Archer Mouse. That's all I know. I don't know who Dolly is, what their backstory is, or how I could get more into character, except I'm playing the ranged attacker. So I think that's all we have in regards to board games with strong RPG elements. So now we're going to take a moment and check in with the lobby. We do record this show live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Tabletop Bellhop, usually Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, but watch our social media feeds to know when we're going live. Now, what does our chat room have to add to our discussion tonight? I noticed it has been scrolling by as we've been talking, which is awesome.
So early on, one of our first suggestions was someone asking whether or not Dungeon Pets with a Z qualifies.
All right. Roger recommends Dungeon Pets so often that I need to sit down and play it with him because I haven't.
Is this your Zensu, Roger? It's Roger's equivalent of Zensu?
Yeah, maybe. Now I know it's similar to Dungeon Lords, and again, what it has is the RPG trappings. That you are a dungeon lord and you are raising pets and having to feed them and nurse them to try to get points. And then Dungeon Lords being the bigger game, you're building a dungeon. But there are so few RPG elements in that. It is definitely a Euro game, but it has fantasy RPG trappings of dungeons and adventurers and monsters. But to me, that's about it. Like it's definitely way more on the Euro game side than a game that has any real role-playing elements. And the main thing is I don't see how I could play different from someone else, right? Like I don't see how, and in Dungeon Pets, you're raising more than one pet. So even if the pet levels up, you're leveling up your various pets as opposed to your character. Like I don't think you feel like someone who's running a hatchery that much in that game. Or even more so, like Sean mentioned earlier, there's suboptimal moves. Would you ever do something because it's cool?
So Darkling Blake suggests Witcher, the Old World, and that definitely has the character progression aspects and collection and that sort of aspects. But it is a competitive game where you are probably going to be going for your optimal choices.
Yeah, and I think that has some of that open world, right? That's one of those miniature, heavy, big box, scenario-based games. I don't know the game well enough to know if you play, like if you get a full ongoing story. I assume you do because I know there's scenario boxes, but I think that one's a good call.
Roger asks, what about Burgle Bros and Spectre Ops?
So those are two hidden role, like one player versus many style games. And again, I think that falls into the yes, you can play in character. Spectre Ops, the one time I played it, I even remember that each of the characters had unique abilities. And it was all about playing against another player, but it didn't have, to me, there isn't enough there. If there was some kind of campaign, if you played a game of Spectre Ops and depending on how you win, you went to another map on the next one and then another map on the other. Now, Burgle Bros may have more of that. Again, not games I played, so I can't talk about them any more than that.
And then finally, Roger suggests Twilight Struggle is being very immersive.
Okay, very immersive. Is being the president of the United States or the president of the USSR and manipulating world events and using them to your advantage role-playing. I just think that's a cool theme, and I think it's a very well-done game, and it brings up lots of historical events, and I love the way it's balanced so that you don't just recreate history every time you play it, but I don't really get any RPG feel for that. Like I'd get just as much RPG feel playing America and Diplomacy. Like it just.
I agree with Roger in that it's immersive, and it's been a very long time since we've played it. But I did feel like, I don't know, you play into being those two different nations and the antagonism between them. And well, I don't know, I remember reading off cards and not not making suboptimal choices, as Sean said, but maybe reading off cards and being like, there's it's maybe RPGs here and it's just below it. Like it felt like that to me. I can see where Roger's coming from.
I think it's one of those games where, again, you can role play in almost any game, and this game lends itself well to that because, at least as as North Americans, we can, and being old enough to remember the Cold War, we can assume some of those ideas and concepts and get into the feel of it. Perhaps more than we can the race car or the shoe.
Well, here, let's put it this way. If you took Twilight Struggle and you rethemed it as two fantasy nations, it probably wouldn't have the same impact.
Well, unless it was two fantasy nations from D&D of which you were a fan. Again, it's that connection to the content, because I'm sure an 18-year-old today wouldn't have the same connection to Twilight Struggle as we do, because they never sat down in the hallway waiting as a nuclear preparation, drill. So
now I got to say, I kind of want to see like the Time of Troubles, which is the Forgotten Realms big, when things went all bad, retheme of Twilight Struggle. Now, I'm not sure who the two empires would be, but
who do you got to pitch that to?
Because it's not just the map, right? It's all the cards. The cards are all historical events. That's the big part of that game. And the way you have the late war and the early war and what cards come out when, and even just the way the China card works for anyone who knows the game. That's a big part of the game is the China card, because it swaps between nations as you're playing the game. But like how you'd have that in a D&D game where you're like, you'd pull it up and it'd be whatever, the Siege of Waterdeep. And
I'm thinking Warhammer lends itself more to it than D&D.
Well, yeah, Warhammer would. You'd have chaos on one side, and except chaos you play chaotic. You chaos on one side and the Empire on the other, or the old world, or whatever you want to call it.
Alrighty. Well, I think I want to thank everyone for those game suggestions, and thanks again to Victor for the question. Now's the time we ask you, our audience out there in the world, what games we missed, or if you have anything you would like to share about role-playing elements in board games.
Let us know in the comments, hit us up on social media, or better yet, post something over on our Discord at discord.tabletopbellhop.com.
And now, a message from our sponsor.
For the most part, the winter holidays are done, and it's time to start looking forward to a couple of fun start-of-the-year holidays, by which I mean Groundhog Day and then Valentine's Day.
Now, a great way to celebrate these yearly happenings is by playing a game. And there's no better series of holiday games than the Holiday Hijinks series from our sponsor, Grand Gamers Guild. These are low-priced, 18-card escape room-style games that are great to play with friends and family. And since they aren't too long, it's pretty easy to fit them in as part of any other celebrations you may be having.
First up, we have the Groundhog Gambit, which was our favorite Holiday Hijinks game out of the ones we've played so far. It makes brilliant use of the 18 cards in the game to present you multiple different puzzles using the same cards. And then there's the Cupid Crisis, where you are trying to save your Valentine's Day date night.
You can get both of these games either in print or in the much cheaper print and play format over at grandgamersguild.com. And don't forget, you can use our special code BELLHOP to get an extra 10% off on top of that.
Can you guess how well a player rolled during an RPG encounter based on their description of how things went? That's the premise behind Adventure Party, the role-playing party game.
Adventure Party comes from Smirk and Dagger Games. We do have to thank for hooking us up with a review copy. It was designed by David Smith and Travis Winstead and features artwork from Graphic Studio.
This mashup of improv-heavy fantasy RPG and party game plays 3 to 8 players, with one round being pretty quick and a full campaign of 3 stories taking about an hour, maybe a little more. There's lots of reading involved, and you need to be able to think quickly on your feet, so the game has a suggested age of 10+.
Adventure Party comes with 12 character screens, each featuring a different fantasy RPG class. Almost 50 magic item cards, over 30 adventures to take part in, some transition cards, tokens for tracking honor and XP, a pad of character sheets, 8 D20 dice, a cardboard GM stand, and a very clear rulebook that even includes one-page instructions for those who can't wait to crack the game open and get playing right away. All of this comes in a decent plastic box insert, great for holding all the game's components, as well as easily fitting the one promo pack that's already out for the game.
Now, a cool piece of bonus material you get in the Adventure Party box is what they call a soundtrack guide. So Smirk and Dagger teamed up with Pocket Bard, which is a RPG background music and audio app, to produce audio for the game. The app is free to download, and you can get all the fantasy scenes you need for free. Now, this guide shows you which scene and which settings to set in that scene to use for each of the game's different adventures. And we used this and thought it was actually pretty cool. It added a nice level of immersion to the game. And it was enough so that the one time we forgot to switch it, it was notable that, like, wait, this music doesn't sound right for what's happening. And it ends up, I forgot to switch it between scenes. And we're like, no, that's better. There we go. So there is also, like, the Pocket Bard app does exist as a standalone thing as well. And you can get additional scenes and sounds and other settings like sci-fi. But everything you need to just play with Adventure Party is 100% free. There's no additional cost to add the songs for the soundtrack guide.
Yeah, I loved the Pocket Bard soundtracks. It really added to the feel of the game. Adventure Party is very quick to set up and play as well as learn. Everyone grabs a character screen and a D20 die, plus 2 random magic item cards. The screen tells you a bunch of facts about your character, including skills, the weapons they have, the items they're carrying, etc. It also lists the success chart that is used for every role in the game.
Now, this presents a range of possible outcomes, with 1 being a total failure, 9 being just failed, 10 being barely a success, and 20 being a stunning success, with a bit of description for each of these results.
Now, optionally, everyone can do an extra step of grabbing a character sheet from the included pad of character sheets and fill out some additional details about your character, including the character's name and their class and their personality traits and reasons they're adventuring and so on. There's also space to record things at the end of the game, like your biggest moment, the total XP you gained, and how much honor you got. Now, the important thing to know at this point, before we go into the full details of the game, is that all of this stuff, all the things on the character sheet and on those character screens, are there only as inspiration for when it's your turn to describe your character's intent and the resulting actions.
And no one's going to stop you and say, your character sheet says axe. Why did you run at this guy with a pole arm?
Exactly.
You select 1 to 3 adventure cards, depending on how long a game you want to play, and then you roll to see who the first GM or guest master is. The guest master then reads off the first card, which sets up a situation for the players to react to. And this ends with them turning to the player on the left and asking, what do you do?
That player then describes their intent, what they want their character to do, which must include the use of one of their 2 magic item cards. They are free to say anything they want and should use the things on their character sheet to help them come up with ideas. Just like in a full pen and paper RPG, there are no right or wrong answers here.
Next, the player rolls their D20, keeping it behind their screen so no one else can see it. They then look at that result, compare it to the success chart, and then share with the group what actually happened. Did what they were trying to do work or not? And how well did it go? They should use the results table to help with this. And while they're doing it, everyone else is going to sit there and take their own D20 behind their own screens, hidden from everyone else, and set it to whatever number they think the player rolled, making sure no one else sees your guess.
Next, we go back to the guest master, who gets to ask one clarifying question, which the active player answers, and then players can make final adjustments to their dice. Then the GM asks the player, did you roll an X? As well as describing why they picked that number. And finally, everyone else reveals their dice and their guesses.
Points are then awarded. The GM collects XP equal to 5 minus the difference between their guess and the player's roll. Everyone else collects 2 honor if they guessed correctly, or 1 honor if they were 1 off from the active player's roll.
Next, it's now the active player's turn to take on the GM role and continue the story from where it left off, ending their narrative with asking the player to their left, what do you do? That player then describes their intent, rolls their dice, describes the outcome, everyone guesses again, and this continues going around the table until you get back to the original guest master. And that guest master will get to wrap up the end of the encounter as part of their description and their actions.
If you've chosen to play more than one adventure, you're now going to roll to see who the next GM will be. The new GM starts off by drawing and reading a random transition card. Everyone discards a magic item that they used in the last round and draws a new one. All future rounds play out the same as the first round, with the group collecting XP and individual players collecting honor.
After you've played as many adventures as you want, with a standard campaign being 3 in 1 sitting, it's the player with the most honor that gets to wrap things up, splitting the group's XP evenly, getting the party's rank, and using that to share a closing scene.
Now, what that overview doesn't really tell you is how diverse and interesting the various encounters or adventures you're going to have to deal with are in Adventure Party. The game has a recommended starting set of 3, and I got to say, they do a great job of showing the diversity and different types of situations you can be thrown into. The important thing here is these aren't just a bunch of combat encounters. This is a lot more depth to that. Now, the first suggested adventure, I think, starts off well with a bang, and you've got a big red dragon who's about to breathe fire on your group, which I think is a great way to get people invested their first game. But others we've seen include each party member having to perform on a stage in the center of town, trying to resist your minds being warped by an elder god, defending the town from giants who are hurling rocks from a distance, making your way through a trap-filled hallway, and so on. There are even some cards that combine with others, leading to even more possibilities, where you might have to deal with something special as well as the drawn encounter, or some additional complication. So you might have the red dragon about to breathe fire on you, but you're also escorting a kobold. With over 30 cards, there's lots of variety, and due to the way the game plays, seeing the same card multiple times is going to result in totally different stories based on your group, your players. Playing even with the exact same group of people with the exact same character standees, you're going to end up with a completely different story each time you play.
Yeah, I was delighted when we discovered that it's not just combat encounters. There's a ton of variability here. And yeah, I agree. Even if you drew the exact same card, it would end up being a totally different experience.
This one's interesting. Now, I have not played this yet, but it's very interesting, as it's one commenter described it as metagaming the board game, because you're sort of doing the opposite of what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be hiding the roles. The roles are supposed to be lost in the game, and in this case, you're actually trying to evoke the roles for everyone to come up with. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think this game is very much, to me, going to win or lose based on the group playing it. And you really need people who are going to buy in to the same level of RPG or of role playing that you are, or I could see this definitely falling apart.
We haven't seen it fall apart yet, but we've only played it with the same group, so I will admit that. I don't know. To me, this is one of those games where you're just like, I heard the premise and I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I'm presented when we first heard it was a demo game. And of course, the demo was the red dragon's about to breathe fire on you. And then what do you do? And I describe what I'm going to do. And he's like, roll the die. Okay, now describe what happens. And now I'm going to try to guess what you rolled. And I was just like, well, that's it. That's the whole game. That is actually kind of brilliant. Like, that's just really neat. And I kind of want to do this the next time we play an actual role-playing game and be like, wait, did you roll a this? You know, because I have so much fun with that. And this was a game that I fully expected it to play how it did. I'm like, yep. And then we played and I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I expected to get out of this game. But then the more I played it and the more different stories we saw, the more I liked the game. Because at first I thought you react to I thought it was going to be very standard, typical tropes that I've seen a million times before and responding to those. And all I'll say is it's not. And I don't want to spoil it. Not that this game's like a legacy game where you spoil anything, but I kind of want people to discover those 30 so adventures on their own.
Yeah, the delight of pulling a card and reading it and having no clue what's going to be on there is part of the joy of the game.
Yeah.
The game continues to pleasantly surprise me. Every time we've played it, it's been a hoot. I do like that you're not entirely at the mercy of the dice. We didn't mention that when going over the mechanics, I don't think, but there is a token that you can hand in for a reroll. I found that I mean, I actually did it one time because I succeeded and I didn't want to succeed. It would be more narratively interesting if I failed,
Right.
which leans into what we were discussing on the previous episode. Is it a role-playing game because I'm making suboptimal choices? So there you go, Sean.
Yeah, every time we played this game, we ended up with a cool role-playing experience. Like it felt like a role-playing game. We told a story. We had characters. We got into character. We checked our XP at the end. So you even got that. Well, you don't get to level up. You still got that kind of feel of how much XP did we earn, right? We end up with awesome stories. And I got to say that, like, I've had pen and paper full traditional role-playing games go worse than some of our sessions of Adventure Party. Like, I've told better stories playing this than some personal games I played in. So I thought that was pretty awesome. This really is a role-playing party game. Like, it manages to pull that off, because the other part is, man, were we laughing? There are a lot of laughs. And like any good party game, it has that moment where you have the why. Why'd you do that? Where you're like, I described my thing and they're like 13, 12, 11. And I reveal and I'm like 6. And everyone's like, what? 6? You said you succeeded. Why? How did that happen? And you get that moment where everyone's trying to justify their roles and their guesses. And I think that's a ton of fun. And actually it's baked into the game where the GM, when they reveal what their guess is, they're supposed to explain why they picked that number. Now, the game does not have the rest of the group doing that, because the game will bog down, but I got to admit, it's still fun if everyone kind of does that. And I got to say, like, as a party game, this had us laughing. Like, we had a great time playing this. I got that experience of Kiss the Goblin, but in a much longer, more involved game. And fans of the show know we're not really big party game fans, but we do enjoy some. And what we like are ones with a little mechanics and meat on them. There's real decisions to be made. It's not totally random. And games that dive into their theme. And I think Adventure Party nails those things.
What made this feel the most reminiscent of an RPG to me was the fact that when we were done, we had a story, a shared story to tell. We went home and the kids are telling it to their grandma and saying, oh, we did this, we did that. Here's the story of what we did tonight. The theming is bang on. I've caught the kids referring to it as Adventure Party, the D&D game. And yes. I get why. I mean, it really feels like Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder. It's very solidly a generic old school fantasy RPG kind of feel.
It's interesting because I think the storytelling part of this sounds great. The guessing part of it doesn't. Like the act of going through and telling stories and playing this out and through the scenario sounds great. It's a shame they threw this guessing number part into it. That is really what it's feeling like to me from this description.
See, I love that. The guessing part makes it. Like I said, I kind of want to throw the guessing part into the next pen and paper role-playing game when something happens and be like, wait a minute, what did you roll to describe things that way? Which I guess would only happen on the GM normally. But yeah, that is honestly what makes the game. So we'll have to see it when we get Sean down to play it. If he's like, no, let's just turn this into an NPR RPG and we'll just play that. Because personally, the only thing I didn't love is the character sheet. Because once you throw those in, it's just so easy to just grab a screen, which has all the details you need and more than enough to let your brain start going, right? To give you the answers you need and more than enough cues to answer any situation. Anytime I put the character sheets out, everyone spends too long filling them out. It like bogs things down right at the start of the game. So you end up with this like happy party game. Let's go quick adventure. No, wait, let's spend 10 minutes while everyone fills out a character sheet. Like, I don't want downtime before the game begins. And then once we started playing, I saw 2 different ways things would go. Either people would totally ignore those character sheets and the options they filled out and just react to the story at hand with the character that's kind of growing in their brain more than the paper, or they spend forever looking at that sheet trying to come up with how to tie in parts of that to their story, and it bogs down and people trying to, I don't know, like win the game as opposed to just going with the flow. So I personally don't really like the character sheets, though I do like the artifact. The now that you're done, you now have this character sheet that you can go, yeah, we played Adventure Party the other day. Here's Karnak, and we ended up getting 32 XP, and I earned 3 honor. There is that aspect of it.
Yeah, I want to hide the character sheets in the bottom of the box because we're talking about bringing this out to public play, and I want to be like, shh, don't even look at those.
Yeah.
I almost feel like they would be better spent to fill out after the game as a memento, and not before or during. Like, they have some spots at the bottom to note key parts in your story. Here's cool things that happened. Here's what I did. Here's what other people did. and you could, fill it in afterwards and bring it home as a little souvenir. But it really did. It bogged things down and just made it flow less.
I see they added one of those sort of legacy keeping track of scores over time aspects, the scroll of heroes, into the rule book, where total number of points divided by number of players record your score, and whether you're legendary or embarrassing.
Yeah, and that's actually how the person with the most honor divides up the XP, and then they're supposed to use that to finish off the story. They get to do the denouement based on the outcome on that sheet to determine if you're heroes or zeros, I guess. Now, the other thing I think everyone needs to know is this is not a traditional pen and paper role-playing game. Despite the rules referring it to a 3-adventure story and they call it a campaign, there is no ongoing or evolving play here. This is a party game. Every time you sit down and play the game, it's a unique standalone experience. There's no carrying your character over. There's no actual advancement. Yes, you're collecting XP, but you're not spending it to get anything. There's no progression whatsoever. The honor you earn is just bragging rights. I have the most honor. I get to finish the story. How much honor do you get? Like maybe you want to go online and compare with your friends. How much honor have you earned in one game? But that's about it. Now, that said, there's nothing stopping you from making this more of a campaign style game. Like there's nothing stopping you from playing the same character and keeping an ongoing rolling XP total between games. But you can have your own headcanon for your character and maybe even, do the thing RPG players like to do and journal in between sessions, what's happening to your character. But none of that is part of the game. That's all additional things that you're welcome to add and I think would be fun to do, but it's not baked into the game in any way.
The XP is just your points. It's how you win the game. And like most party games, you could toss the scoring system out of the window and just play for laughs and probably have a equally good, if not better, experience.
Yeah, well, and you said it right there. And I think that's the key with a lot of party games. This is an experience where they tacked on a scoring system to make it a game. Which isn't a bad thing, because that's how a lot of good party games are. We talk about a whole lot of party games where you throw out the scoring and have a great experience as the party. But I think that's I'm feeling that a lot on this one.
So I will say the thing they did that was nice is by making it XP, that ties in that theme of a traditional role-playing game. You get that D&D feel by getting your XP at the end of the session. Like that is a good tie-in. And if you're going to put points in the game, it's a good way to do it. Now, I think as a light improv style role-playing experience, this could be a fantastic game for RPG curious board gamers. And Kurt Covert himself explained that's why he published this game. That is his goal. He loves role-playing games. He doesn't publish role-playing games, but he wanted to put something out there to get people to make that gap, to bridge that gap, to go from board games to role-playing games. And that was his goal with this game. And I think this is a great choice for that. If anyone's ever been like, oh, I'm scared of D&D, it scares me, it intimidates me, try this first. And if you like this, then maybe you want to go out and buy the 2025 Player's Handbook and dive into that whole world. But this would be a great free form experience. You have a ton of freedom. There's very little rules to learn. You don't have to worry about any bookkeeping except for collecting some tokens. There's no character death to worry about or any of the other things that can come up in a full role-playing game. No prep, none of the added work required. Now, the biggest issue, though, that could be the biggest turnoff for people is that freedom. You can say anything. You can change the story however you want, and every player has as much narrative control as everyone else. And that can be intimidating. This is an improv experience where you're required to come up with not only your character's reactions to a situation like in a traditional game, but you're also the one responsible at the end of your turn to come up with the ongoing story and present the next situation to the next player. And that is going to be more than some people are going to be willing to do. And that's not for everyone. Right, Deanna?
Yeah, there's a lot of shared world building here. As much as I called it an old school RPG experience, geez, it sure got a lot of pass the stick improv going on. That's not my cup of tea. I had some fun with this. I couldn't not enjoy the game with how much our kids loved it. And watching my mom get into her character just cracked me up. It was great. We've had some super fun experiences playing it, but I would hate playing this with strangers. I know that I would seize up and blank. So,
yeah, I think this is a great intro bridge for certain kinds of RPGs. I think sounds like a pretty miserable bridge to D&D, though, because D&D, modern D&D, is a lot more about the mechanics than the storytelling. Yes, there is storytelling. I'm not trying to put down D&D here at all, but it is storytelling based off of the mechanics, not the other way around, really, which was what this is. So, great bridge to Apocalypse World, maybe.
But you get that. I rolled a 1. It's a critical failure. I rolled a 20. It's a critical success. You are describing it in terms of that range from 1 to 20. It is leaning into the mechanics more than modern indie RPGs. I actually think it might be a good entry point to something like D&D. I don't know.
I see. For me, Apocalypse World or PBTA games, you roll those 2d6, and it's instead of 1 to 20, it's 2 to 12. That is what is happening. If you roll a 2, you have failed miserably. If you roll a 12, you have succeeded fantastically, and there are no other mechanics. That's it. That is the mechanic. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's where this feels more like the modern hippie games than the mechanic laden heavy character sheet aspects of, where you're always trying to find something that'll modify that die roll in your D&D game.
Well, if anyone does use Adventure Party to try to bridge that gap, let us know how it goes and let us know what you're bridging into.
I feel like it's D&D light. Like, it's a better intro to RPG experience than that D&D Adventure Begins board game, which we reviewed previously.
I agree.
No argument there.
Now, flipping things around, I think most role-playing groups are going to love this. Especially those D&D groups, a fantasy RPG crowd, the Dungeon Crawl. I think in particular, Dungeon Crawl Classics, people are going to love this because they already like the gonzo, wacko things going a little out of left field, right? Pathfinder, D&D, going back to earlier editions, Mutants and Mastermind. So why not? Because you're leveling up. I think the fantasy RPG crowd's going to love this. Like, this is just a great party game for that group where you can have fun making up fantasy stories without the pressure of a campaign or a full game and scheduling and everything that comes with a traditional game. I even think this might be fun to play with your characters, right? Take your characters and, I don't know, this is backstory maybe. This is when we were first young adventurers, what did we do? And make up some backstory for your characters. Or maybe even use this as an improv first step to making your newest characters in the game. Or it's just, these are the tales you're telling around the campfire at night as part of your group. Or this would be a great one to play when, one or more regulars can't make it, so you can't continue your ongoing campaign. Break this one out. I think it's going to be a huge hit.
Yeah, I think it would be a great filler game for RPG groups, like a quick, light story experience before or after your regular game, or for when someone's AWOL.
Yeah, I think that's.
I do agree with Sean.
That's really a strong spot for it. Again, is let those people especially if you've got games where maybe it isn't improv heavy. This is a great way to let those people who want to stretch their improv legs do so.
And I do agree with Sean that I think this would also be a hit with the story-based party game crowd, the ones who are used to doing collaborative world building as part of their games. I think they'd also enjoy the party game aspect of it, to taking things a little less seriously than you may in your regular games. Though really, my strongest suggestion, and this still stands even with our debate back and forth a bit there, is I think you just got to try this. Like a single round takes about 15 minutes. Less. So if you only have 3 players, you can hammer through it even quicker, just to see if this game would be right for you and your group. Like, do a demo at a con. Like, that's what we got, was the less than 5-minute demo. It was literally the guy described what was happening. I said what I was going to do. Then he had me roll the die. Then I described what happened and he guessed what I rolled and managed to get pretty close. So we did pretty good that first thing. Like, just doing that will give you the experience of this game. Like, see if anyone local's got a copy, if there's any local events, maybe see if your local game store will put on a demo night for you or crack open a copy. There is a set of simplified rules right in the start of the instruction book that's 1 page that'll teach you how to play a shorter, quicker game as well, with less bookkeeping, even though there's almost no bookkeeping as it is.
Well, there you have our review of Adventure Party, the role-playing party game. We know what we rolled on this one. What would you guess? Was it a crit?
So now it's your turn to be guest master and tell us a story. If you played Adventure Party, we want to know how it went. If you've tried to use it to bridge a gap, I really want to know how it went. But if you haven't, what I want to hear about is your favorite party game. It could be an improv-based one like this or something else. I'll leave that up to you.
Leave us a comment wherever you found this review. Hit us up on social media, where we can be found everywhere as Tabletop Bellhop, one word, or let Mo know at mo@tabletopbellhop.com.
Well, that was the double bell.
Those dings mean our shift's coming to an end, and it's time to lock the lobby doors.
But before we start locking things down, let's take a moment to thank a selection of our Tabletop Bellhop Patreon patrons.
So first up, I want to welcome our newest Tabletop Bellhop Patreon patron, David Hutchinson, better known by the folk in our lobby as Charlie Brown Windsor.
Thank you to Dukas.
Thank you, Roger Malash, if you're still there in the chat room.
Diane Tuzano. Thanks, Mom.
Pat and Tori Domey. Hope to see you guys again in person sometime soon. Thank you for supporting the show.
Jeff and Sheila Seuss, we're probably going to see you tomorrow. Well, your first stop to finding us should be at the tabletopbellhop.com, but you can find us all over the web as Tabletop Bellhop, one word, and on your podcatcher of choice as the Tabletop Bellhop Gaming Podcast.
Note that's tabletopbellhop.com. I don't know where you'll go if you go to the tabletopbellhop.com. That could be bad. That might be one we want to register just in case. Now, our goal as the Tabletop Bellhops is to be the Dear Abby for gamers. That's what we want to be. And to that end, if you have a game or game night question for us, you can get it to me by emailing questions@tabletopbellhop.com or head to our webpage and click on Ask the Bellhop. Or as this episode pointed out, you could also hit us up on social media.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If you like what you heard, we'd love it if you'd post a review on iTunes or Spotify. And while you're there, you can subscribe to get notified of upcoming episodes.
That's all for us tonight.
For the Tabletop Bellhop Gaming Podcast, I'm Sean.
I'm Deanna.
I'm Mo.
Thank you.
And
game on.